So, by training, I'm actually a mathematician, a statistician. And if you look at my website to find out what kind of research I do, it'll tell you I do clinical trials, benefit-risk decision-making for medicines, and utility of Bayesian approaches in these areas. If I'm asked to speak, it's often on that latter. But I'm here to talk about what NIHR has done for me as a researcher. And so I thought, it's 10 years, I'll just pick my 10 favourite things. So I thought I'd start, number one, the trials. The number of trials I've done with NIHR funding is growing all the time, but we've looked at FIAT, for example, which was to find out whether patients with schizophrenia could be encouraged to take their treatment by financial incentives or not. We've looked at cystic fibrosis gene therapy. I'm sure you've heard about that. That was one of the Imperial Trials Unit trials. Other trials, LEOPARDS, Recital, we have wonderful acronyms. But the important thing is that without RFPB, without EME, without HTA, none of those would be happening. But my website will tell you that I'm doing that research. Actually, that's not strictly true. The people who are doing the research are back at Imperial at the moment while I'm out doing this kind of thing. And that is where the NIHR funding has made a huge difference. So the second thing on my list is actually the importance of not just CTUs, not just the HTA budget, but it was Tom Wally who takes the credit for this, of pulling out support funding for the NIHR, those units doing NIHR funding, that would enable us to support staff, to bridge contracts, because without that, we don't have those core staff planning the studies, planning the next studies, managing them. The study-specific funding doesn't cover that, and so that CTU support funding from NIHR is absolutely vital. And then NIHR invests in people. So third on my list is the investment it's putting in to the people of the future. We've been lucky, we've had CTU fellows. We've had Will Mann, who spent 6 months with us, or best part of 10 months part-time actually, talked about lungs. So these are fellowships from NIHR where people spend 6 months in the CTU. We've had Tony Gordon from emergency medicine, Chris Gale, who I know is here, neonatal medicine. We've got Shiraz Marka, who's one of Ara's colleagues, who's a surgeon who will be spending 6 months with us. And these are, I think, the trialists of the future. And NIHR makes that possible for them to spend that time out. And that's without all of the NIHR fellowships, chairs, of which Imperial gets a goodly number and some excellent ones. So thank you, NIHR, for that. And then, dear to my heart, research methods and interns. So these are people in the quantitative disciplines, statistics in my case, economists, operational researchers, and this is an NIHR scheme. And just within Imperial, we've had people come in to do an MSc and spend time with us. Ed Waddingham, who came in on that scheme, was an actuary who changed profession. He stayed with us, got involved in the Big EU project, is now doing a PhD on benefit risk of trials. We had Greg working on another one, looking at how you deal with the difficult endpoints you get in emergency medicine trials. And we've currently got another one called Meredith, who's just finishing her MSc and doing a project, and will spend the next year looking at biomarkers in cancer trials. Now, she won't solve it, but what she's doing is getting an interest and a training that will enable her to contribute in the future. And each of those has an intern with them, so these are young undergraduates who come and spend the summer with us to see whether they want to come into NIHR funding, so come into sort of research world, including NIHR. So coming next to my list is, as a researcher, you soon find you're not just doing research, but you're getting involved in the funding of research. And my first NIHR experience of that was actually on the HTA commissioning board when I was just a member of it, and I met all sorts of people on that board, Hal Williams, Freddie Hamdy, John Deeks I already knew, Nikki Cullum, and I learned a huge amount about how to do trials. Absolutely great group. I was on a DMEC on a neonatal trial that was chaired by Adrian Grant. And Adrian said to me, this is some years ago, he said, I've got a problem, he said, I've got a meeting next week and I can't find a statistician. Could you possibly come along for just one meeting? That was the first meeting of the Programme Grants for Applied Research Programme. It was the first batch of outline proposals. And that was an eye-opener. Of course, it wasn't just one meeting. It was several years before I stepped down. But to see that flowering, and we miss Adrian greatly, real shame that he can't be here, but wonderful experience. Again, I learned so much from that. And then, having had a bit of a break from NIHR funding committees, I got an email sometime last summer from Tom Wally. No title on it. Can I ring you sometime? And my only thought was, which of my studies is going pear-shaped right now? But Tom said, well, have you thought about applying for the chair of the commissioning board? And actually, it wasn't such a bad idea. Nowadays, it's much more rigorous. I had to fill in applications, have an interview. It wasn't like Adrian, just twisting my arm. But it is such a privilege. I now spend 40% of my time doing that. The programme prioritises the most important research. I don't directly do that, although I observe it, because, of course, that's clinicians, patients, and others. But what we then do is commission the excellent research teams to actually answer these questions. And I chaired my first two-day meeting a couple of months ago. And at the end, we had the summing up. And the excellent office staff summarised and said, she said, if they accept the recommendations that the committee has made, that's a £15 million commitment. I mean, what a privilege to be able to commit £15 million to really important questions being well done. So that was a good couple of days' work. But my final three are perhaps a little bit more personal. Going back, Sally and I were both editors of the Cochrane Cystic Fibrosis Group in the days when it was chaired by Ros. And on a train back from Liverpool, Sally said to me, the conversation started, I need to pick your brains. And the conversation ended, well, you need to go and see Russell. Because Sally's problem at the time was lots of people were lobbying her because they couldn't get enough statisticians. The MRC and others were pulling out of funding some of the key MSc courses. She said, what are we going to do about it? And we had a brainstorm about that. And she also asked me one or two things about my career development. And the end of the conversation was, well, I think we need to second you a day a week, but you need to see Russell. So an indication of sort of creative problem solving. And that brings me on to my penultimate one, which was I got sent to see Russell in the bowels of the Department of Health. And I didn't know Russell, and he sat there with these spreadsheets. And I really thought, perhaps this is just all being kicked into the long grass. But blow me, of course it wasn't. And what we now have is the Research Methods programme. We've had 2 rounds of Research Methods Opportunity Scheme to engage the Stats and Economics departments, 3 rounds each of triennial allocations of MSc studentships to MedStats and Health Economics. That's, I think, about 50 students apiece now that we've done. 7 rounds of the Research Methods and Interns, 2 systematic review fellowships, all designed to bring in bright young people and engage them. And then finally, my absolute top has to be Athena Swan. I mean, the day that I walked in and found lots of my male medical colleagues saying, we've had a letter. Does anybody know what Athena Swan is? Well, of course, I'm a mathematician. It came from the maths and chemistry departments for good reason. And my best analogy, I was on a train last month, coming back, and the train was going slow. And do you know the explanation? There's a swan on the line. I kid you not, this train was going slow because this swan would not move. It's a bit like the BRCs. It's kind of, we know where we want to go, and there's a swan on the line. Some passengers were great about it. At least one said, can't we just run it over? To which the answer is no, of course, because the Queen owns them and you really can't touch swans. So thank you for that. It's changed the culture well in STEM departments, which we can't thank Sally for, but in medical schools and much more widely. So I really hope that the BRCs, in their interviews, show what it's done for them. So thank you. I cannot imagine what it would be like being a researcher without NIHR. I just can't begin to think what I would be doing or how I'd be living my research life. So thank you, NIHR, and happy birthday, and many, many more.